The Terminator started with a nightmare and became a sci-fi classic. Its sequel became a landmark. And then came the chaos. Studio meddling, tangled timelines, and the endless need to reboot what was already complete. This is the rise and fall of the Terminator.
Terminator was an idea that I had when I was in Rome. I was just sitting around basically in my hotel room. I was in fact sick at the time. I had real high fever. And I just laying on the bed thinking and came up with all this bizarre imagery. And I think also the idea that, you know, because I was in a foreign city by myself and I felt very sort of dissociated from humanity in general, it was very easy to project myself into these two characters from the future who were out of sync, out of time, out of place, you know, that sort of thing. I'd always wanted to do some sort of really definitive robot story because it really, you know, had really never been done.
In 1984, James Cameron was an unknown director with one failed B-movie behind him and nothing to lose. He had developed the concept for The Terminator in collaboration with his friend William Wisher, and to get the film made, he sold the rights for just $1 to producer Gail Ann Hurd on the condition that she'd let him direct. Hurd, who would later become his wife, helped shape the screenplay and secured a distribution deal with Orion Pictures. The result wasn't just another sci-fi flick. It was something darker, sharper, and far more memorable. The 1980s were a golden age for horror, and Cameron clearly took notes from John Carpenter's Halloween. Most of the movie takes place over 2 nights in dark, neon-lit Los Angeles. Cameron builds suspense using second-plan movement, false jump scares, and music that sounds like a heartbeat buried under machinery. The structure is pure thriller. A looming threat, a vulnerable protagonist, and a climax where the monster comes back one last time. The visual language is cold and purposeful. The Terminator's point of view is tinted red. His laser sight glows red. Police sirens pulse red. And of course, there are the eyes, 2 glowing dots of inhuman rage. It's hard not to think of HAL 9000 in A Space Odyssey. To enhance the Terminator's presence, Cameron often filmed Schwarzenegger from below, making his body seem even more mechanical and unstoppable. And The Terminator would become one of the last big analog effects movies. Scenes of the future were shot using rear projection. Stop-motion animation gave movement to the endoskeleton. The smoking jacket? Acid on fabric. The camera slows down only for one thing: death. Every time the Terminator prepares to kill, time dilates. It's brutal, mechanical poetry. And this motif returns in T2, when Sarah first sees the Terminator again. Time stretches, because the fear never left her. Cameron didn't invent killer robots, but after this film, they were never the same. His version wasn't slick or human-like. It was a walking executioner, rigid, expressionless, precise. After the Terminator, the 80s and 90s were flooded with its echoes. RoboCop, Cyborg, Universal Soldier. All of them borrowed not just the voice and movement, but Schwarzenegger's build and presence. The Terminator was made for just over $6 million and grossed nearly $80 million. It launched Cameron's career and turned Schwarzenegger into a star. But as successful as it was, no one could have guessed what would come next. 7 years later, Cameron returned with Terminator 2, Judgment Day, and this time, he had a budget big enough to match his ambition. With $100 million to work with, T2 became the most expensive film ever made at the time, and every cent is on the screen. T2 didn't replace the original, it built on it. The horror evolved, the action exploded, and the story deepened. Cameron knows how to make sequels that matter. His follow-ups don't repeat, they reimagine. Take Sarah Connor. She doesn't just return, she becomes someone else entirely. The soft-spoken waitress is gone. In her place is a hardened warrior, paranoid, traumatized, and laser-focused on preventing the future. She's not just a survivor anymore. She's a mother trying to stop the apocalypse. And then there's the Terminator himself. In the first film, he was death incarnate, unstoppable, unemotional, inhuman. In T2, he returns as something entirely different, a protector, a father figure. It's the same machine, but the role is reversed, and that reversal gives the story its emotional core. By the end, this cold, mechanical killer delivers one of the most human lines in blockbuster history.
I know now why you cry, but it's something I can never do.
And Cameron doesn't stop at explosions and chase scenes. He dares to ask bigger questions. Can a machine learn compassion? Can humanity avoid self-destruction? T2 was more than a sequel. It was a turning point, not just for the franchise, but for action filmmaking itself. With a worldwide box office of $519 million, it became a global phenomenon, and for a moment, the future looked bright. But then, something changed. James Cameron left the franchise after Judgment Day, not because he wanted to, but because he no longer owned it. He'd sold the rights years earlier to direct the original. That decision opened the door for the first two films, but shut him out of everything that followed. Without his vision, the series lost its way. Every post-T2 entry had something to offer, but scattered successes couldn't outweigh the larger issues. Terminator 3 had a chase sequence that felt straight out of Cameron's playbook. The practical effects, the scale, the attention to visual detail. But story-wise, it was a thin echo of T2. The villain wasn't more terrifying. The stakes weren't higher. The film replayed the apocalypse narrative without adding anything new, which undercut the emotional weight of the previous ending. The TV series The Sarah Connor Chronicles explored the franchise's core theme, humanity's relationship with machines, with surprising depth at times. But the overall quality was uneven, and it struggled to find a consistent tone. Terminator Salvation tried something radically different. It ditched the time travel structure and set the story fully in the post-apocalyptic future. Some scenes had clever editing tricks and striking cinematography. The desaturated film stock evoked the grim tone of war, and for once, the battles were mostly practical, gritty, and grounded. But despite its bold direction, Salvation felt detached from what made the originals work. It could have been part of another franchise entirely. Terminator Genisys started off strong, recreating scenes from the original and twisting familiar dynamics in postmodern fashion. Kyle Reese becomes the one who needs saving. At first, it's a fun inversion, but once the story steps out of 1984, it becomes a messy shooter with little to say and nothing to add. Terminator Dark Fate tried to clean the slate, ignoring the weaker sequels and returning to the tone of the originals. James Cameron returned as a producer, and both Hamilton and Schwarzenegger reprised their roles. But even with that legacy talent on board, the film offered no real dramatic progression. Most of the runtime was spent on chase scenes and CG fights. Nostalgia alone couldn't carry the film. The callbacks were many, but they weren't enough to rebuild an emotional connection. In the end, repeated attempts to revive the saga have left it in ruins, smoldering pieces of a once great story, unable to live on their own. Maybe the franchise should have taken the Terminator's final lesson to heart. Sometimes, the best way forward is to lower yourself into the lava.